Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Anthony Fauci. His diary musings about having dinners with famed journalists during COVID-19 and the numerous other things that are coming out from his diary, but also generally from the trial that he's undergoing right now. It evokes memories for so many of us. And I'll be very honest, I'm one of those people who looks back at the lockdowns and hardly believes that we went through that. It's almost as if they never happened. But for so many of us, the memories are evoked of neighbors who couldn't have guests at their child's funeral, or couldn't attend the birth of their grandchildren, or buy seeds at the local garden center, or attend the weddings of family members. We discuss all of this with my dear friend Peter Laffin. Peter's no stranger to this program. He's senior editor at the Washington Examiner, overseeing In Focus and Restoring America. He's formerly a staff writer for the National Catholic Register, and gosh, all in all, one of the most salient voices in the culture commentary conversation today. Peter, my friend, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. You're too kind, Marcus. Thank you. And I have to return that compliment to you completely. I enjoy your show. I enjoy all your monologues. And I want to say that I share your thought that it brings, all this Fauci business brings me back to the lockdown. And I think that's why there's such an uproar about this issue, is because it was an incredibly dark and unprecedented time. And the emotional responses we're still having, I think it indicates how much we're all still dealing with that very odd disruption that happened to us in 2020.
You know, Peter, I don't know if I've handled it in the most healthy of manners. I wonder if I just blocked the whole thing out. I think I just pretend it never happened. It's hard to think about that the whole world shut down for almost 2 years.
Yeah, it almost feels like it happened to somebody else. And I think that's my main takeaway from watching the incredible hearing yesterday where Anthony Fauci said, pleaded the fifth 111 times. Wow. Was that this wasn't about figuring anything out. This wasn't about learning from past mistakes. You know, and both sides tried to frame it that way. We're going through this exercise because we want to figure out how to do this better in the future. I don't think that's really what any of this was about. I think it was about history and shaping the historical narrative of how this unprecedented event affected all of us. And it's very important that we get our history right. And so I wish that politicians on both sides would stop that farce and just say, what we're attempting to do here is understand what the heck happened to us then. And I think we did make some progress yesterday, even though Fauci didn't say a word.
Maybe that's a great place to start. So we all know that for the public record, Anthony Fauci said nothing. But you plead the fifth once, and it tells a huge story. You plead it 111th times. You've painted a novel for people.
Well, it's incredible how it's being covered and what that says, too, because there isn't just silence from Fauci. There's also silence from most of the media outlets that were parroting Fauci's narrative in 2020 about what was happening. And now we understand, now that we have Fauci's diary, exactly how close some of those relationships were between Fauci and certain members of the media. Like, for instance, we know that Fauci actually fed questions to Jake Tapper. Here's what you should ask me during this interview that we're going to have on CNN, and pretend that we're doing real journalism, and here's how I'll answer it. And I think it goes to something very, very deep and disconcerting, and that's that our information system got this narrative, this history wrong from the very beginning. Now, at the very beginning of this strange period, we were not allowed to ask the question of whether or not this virus came from a lab. And if we did, we would likely have our social media accounts suspended. Mine was. I reported on this very early on, and I had my own social media account suspended for even just raising the question of a lab leak possibility. And beyond that sort of just brazen censorship, there was also a lot of social pressure. The head science writer from the New York Times, for instance, was very insistent that even positing that this virus could have come from a lab is inherently racist, and you're racist if you're saying this.
Yeah.
And which always struck me as hilarious, because wouldn't it be more racist to say that the virus came from a wet market? That, that somebody's culture produces,
than a laboratory, yeah.
Yeah, but we know now a lot more than we did then, and that old line that you can't talk about where this came from, that's indefensible now. And unfortunately, because we weren't allowed to talk about it for about the first year, and really maybe the first 2 years, we got our own narrative incorrect. We got our own history incorrect. And that's why I think we still have so many unresolved feelings about this. But we do have a pretty good roadmap of what happened at this point. I think history books in 20 years will have this down pretty clear. I think we all need a little distance. But it's safe to say that this is highly likely that what happened here is that this virus escaped from a level 3 biolab, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, that was known to not be safe enough to do this sort of research. And it caused a major emergency in the Chinese government. Chairman Xi Jinping interceded personally, which was incredibly rare. And the virus spread throughout the world from this one accident. Now, why weren't we allowed to say this out loud? Why did Anthony Fauci push this so hard that we can't talk about this even as a possibility? And the answer is as disturbing as anything in this entire story. And the answer is that it's very highly likely that Anthony Fauci, as director of the National Institutes of Health, approved funding for the specific research that was happening at the Wuhan Institute of Virology that led to the COVID outbreak. And so that his entire response was engineered to steer American media, American people away from the truth of his own involvement. It's very important to say this, though, and this is really important to know for your audience, that it does not seem as if COVID was leaked with any intentionality. In fact, all of the evidence suggests otherwise, that this was an accident. But that doesn't change the fact that the cover-up was very real.
And honestly, if you had said those exact words and I had corroborated it, I'd say about 6 years ago now, 5 to 6 years ago, we'd be in hot water right about now.
Definitely. And this is the thing, like I said, just for me reporting on this, talking to experts in the field, I had my social media account suspended. That's another part of how a big part of the COVID story was how crazy the information system, how forcefully it was shut down by the powers that be at the time. Everybody was in uproar in the past year that Jimmy Kimmel was taken off the air. And I can almost kind of understand, the U.S. government should not have anything to say about what people say in the media. That's where I stand on that as a journalist. But how extreme it was during the COVID era compared to what we're faced with now in the media, there's no comparison at all. I've a lot of fellow journalists, a colleague of mine, he describes this as a radicalizing event for him. He wasn't a big free speech advocate at the time, and he is now, because we don't even know how much damage was done by this lie. It's a lie so big that it's impossible to put it back together. How this lie, how this steering away from the truth of what happened may have affected our response to the virus. We just don't know. There's some theories. But that to me is the greatest tragedy of this entire thing, is that this one man who told this one lie scrambled our culture and scrambled our understanding of ourselves, and as a result, got I don't know how many people killed.
Yeah, let
so
alone
we just have to put the history together.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to have to put the history together after the fact. I'm talking with Peter Laffin. Peter's a dear friend, a culture commentator. He works with the Washington Examiner. He's senior editor with them, oversees their In Focus and Restoring America. And we're talking about Anthony Fauci and his hearings right now, holding him to accountability for what were ostensibly deliberate misinformations on his part. And his diary seems to be attesting against him as well. We're going to continue on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. I'm talking with Peter Laffin, senior editor at the Washington Examiner. Peter, you were sharing earlier about we had just begun touching on the reality that so much of what was done by Fauci during that time and so much of what was pushed was, in hindsight, even still inscrutable. But like you mentioned, we're just going to have to process things as we go. One of the questions I ask, that everyone else is asking too, is what about the people who endured tremendous injustices by the draconian, now we know, contrived measures under COVID? Like that family in Ohio that was arrested, even though they sat far away from people, with people who lived in their same household and nobody else, and they were still arrested or at least forcefully taken off the field. What about all of those families?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't see any pathway to justice for these folks. And I know it would have been very satisfying yesterday if members of the committee could have done something that tripped Fauci into perjuring himself or some such thing. And I guess there is a chance he'll be censured. I think it's a small one. But I don't think there's going to be any legal repercussions to any of this. All of those injustices are incredibly real. And all of the advice that was given from Fauci to state and local governments on how to best respond to the pandemic was, woefully ignorant of what would have been best for us at the time. Unfortunately, I just don't see any pathway to justice except, like I was saying earlier, getting the history right. Now, there was some justice done yesterday in terms of seeing Fauci's stature diminished. I have to say I did feel some bit of satisfaction from that. But, for the people who couldn't go to the funerals of loved ones, for the kids who lost 2-3 years worth of reading level instruction, and who've yet to gain it back. And, I also think of kids. I remember seeing this report early on that young kids, toddlers, when they saw people in masks and they couldn't see them speak through their mouths, that affected their brain development. As we know now, the little blue flimsy masks on our faces did very little. It seems Fauci, though he was very confident in public, was not so confident that was a good idea behind the scenes. Fauci likes to say now that he didn't get anything closed. We know now that is absolutely untrue. He was bragging in his diary about getting schools closed and restaurants shut down. And all the while, he was also bragging about his rubbing shoulders with celebrities. So it's a very sordid affair. He's so old, though, he received a blanket pardon from Joe Biden on the way out the door. He will probably not die in prison. I'm one person who thinks, he probably should, just for the cover-up, because, like I said earlier, the cover-up of the origin affected our response.
Yeah.
And that's a lie so big, and that should be criminal. I don't think we're ever going to get it.
Both you and I, we talk about this. We strive away from hyperbole whenever we look at these issues. So please caution me if I'm going there. But just reading the entries that were made public from his diary, one cannot help but get the sense that a lot of this was a power trip for him to see how far he could go and get away with it.
It most certainly seemed that way. And if we can look back at COVID as it was unfolding, we should have recognized it then. But we were all so afraid. And we have to remember that. We were deathly afraid. Here's a terrible lie that was in the diary that explains some of that fear. Fauci writes in his diary that COVID functioned as something as a bad flu. And that ended up being the truth.
Mm-hmm.
However, in public, he said a few times, it's 10 times deadlier than the flu. You also remember some of the things that he was saying about the vaccination.
Yep.
If you've been vaccinated, you cannot transmit it to another person. He was saying that in public. He was also lying about, this is something that we've actually known for a while, this isn't from the diary, that he was inflating the number of people who were going to have to be vaccinated for us to reach herd immunity. He was saying it was a certain number, but, behind the scenes, we know from his writing, we know from his emails that that wasn't the real number. And he's even copped up to some of this, saying that, it was a noble lie. I was trying to scare you into compliance, basically. But for the people who couldn't get to work, for the people whose businesses closed down, for the people who were isolated from loved ones, that's cold comfort now.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't think there will be justice in that sense. If people want to do something with this, though, I would urge them to get very serious about protecting free speech rights in their communities. The answers that ended up being the right ones, they were out there at the time. They were just systematically suppressed.
Yep.
And so look at the Congress people you're voting in. Look at your senators. What's your stance on free speech? Should the government, as the Biden administration did, be able to come down on social media companies and pressure them into suppressing opinions that they don't prefer? That happened. And I think that prevented us from having a frank and honest conversation that would have saved us so much misery in the end. So if somebody's looking to channel their anger, I'd suggest that.
I agree, and I think you're completely right about that. And we allowed it to happen. I think so many of us were just so afraid. And like you mentioned, the throttling of information on digital media was, a lot of us had no control over that. But I have another question, Peter, just based on what you just shared. Given the gargantuan fame that he amassed during COVID and how the media, whether they were innocent or guilty, canonized this man, they've sort of galvanized him against accusation. Is that working against us who just want the truth to come out now?
It's a really interesting question. How much our own feelings get wrapped up in things like that. I remember seeing there was an old late night host named James Corden. Mm-hmm. He had a show. I actually thought he was one of the funnier ones. I don't think he
the
has
British guy
anymore. He's the guy who did the car seat. They sing sing along. And he was doing one of his songs. And okay, this is kind of cute and catchy. And then it turned into this love fest for Fauci, this veneration. Where everybody suddenly who was dancing in the street had umbrellas with Fauci's face on it. It got really, really creepy there for a little bit. Looking back, that's remarkable that ever happened.
And that makes for good television.
Now it also makes for incredible gawking at clips on YouTube that we ever got that far. But his diary, it shows us how he was reacting to those things in real time. There's one entry where he's writing about Julia Roberts and talking about himself, how he is probably the most famous man in the world. And you could see he's really relishing in this. And it also seems that he was getting his staff to sort of pump this up and work this angle, almost like it was a strategy. We can get people to do what we want if we present ourselves as, infallible. And so there is some satisfaction, like I said, and yesterday in seeing him sit there. He looked very tiny behind that desk too, and I relished that. To see him sit there behind that desk looking so small, he had been taken down to size. I want to say one other thing, though, about some of the Republican lawmakers who are asking questions. I want to give a lot of credit to Rand Paul for asking great questions And I wish, really science-based questions, factual questions, and I wish there could have been an exchange between him and Fauci, because he had him absolutely nailed on a few technical questions. I didn't love some of the other Republican questioners. You have to remember, when you see hearings like this, where all the different senators or all the different congressmen get to harangue whoever the witness is, what they're doing is they're not trying to get to the truth for the most part. They're trying to generate social media clips.
Of course they are.
Of themselves, because they have campaigns coming up. There was one guy, Bernie Moreno, he's a senator from Ohio. I bet your audience has seen, he had that clip, "Who the F do you think you are?" But he didn't say F. He said the word as a senator. And there are a few other things like that where it's like, okay, it's possible to go so far and to allow our emotions to carry us so far into anger that we end up helping the thing we're trying to hurt. I thought that some of the more crass and some of the dumber questions gave Fauci an opportunity to say, hey, look at these people questioning me. They're not too bright either. And that's why I also never liked the Plandemic. Do you remember that? The Plandemic? Remember that documentary that was viral?
Yeah.
Where COVID wasn't what it actually was, which it was a virus that accidentally leaked out from the lab. Instead, what this documentary and these people were saying is it was from Bill Gates. They're trying to reduce the global population. That kind of thing, for which there was never a shred of evidence, and I know there wasn't. I looked as hard as I could for it. That also gave Fauci the upper hand when he shouldn't have had it back in 2020. Saying things. So when you're in an opposition against a tyrant, it's very important to be disciplined. Yeah. And to hold yourself to a certain standard of behavior and intellectual discipline, so as not to tip your hand too far as to give the other side the upper hand.
Which, unfortunately, in some ways we are doing. Well, Peter, as usual, thank you. We will continue our conversations. My guest has been Peter Laffin, senior editor at the Washington Examiner. He's been shedding very sound wisdom into this whole situation with Anthony Fauci. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.